All right, current state of the project here. On our parent blueprint, we have a series of arrays holding mask data, rotation values, colors, and names. We are passing those arrays into a loop graph. Inside the loop, we're accessing individual indices of those arrays and then setting the values on whatever the points happen to be according to the mask. So there's an important piece of information when you're working with partition point streams, right? Remember we had this attribute partition node. What's going to come out will also be partitioned. So if I inspect this, we're only going to see one neighborhood represented in the data, depending on which of these streams we pick, right? So here's neighborhood 2. There's nothing in neighborhood 2 for reasons I'll discuss in a second, but there's 3 and 4 and 5, and they're all separated out. So we really want to put these back together. So I'm just going to add a merge points node. And once this regenerates, we'll see we have most of our neighborhoods, 1, 3, 4, 6, and so on. The reason we don't have 2 and 5, I believe, is because they're just outside of what we're allowing because we're doing this culling on this mountain range there. So I'm not too worried about that. I think this is all behaving as expected. One final note on the partition point stream data here. You'll notice that on either side of the attribute partition node, the wire is thin versus thick. This just means there's multiple point streams. And then as soon as we've merged those streams again, we can see we have the thin blue wire connecting the merge points with the static mesh spawner. I don't really want to do any mesh spawning here. What I'd like to do is actually create a named reroute so that we can pipe this data back into our building stuff. And this is our original test stuff there. We can get rid of that, clean up a little bit. All right, so currently what's happening here with our graph in terms of the flow of the point data is we're generating our raw landscape points. We're filtering out for height and probably some other stuff. We're applying our noise values here. We're generating our city center data here. And then we're generating our process landscape data. So from there, we are coming up to this section where we're creating our neighborhoods. And then currently we're just passing the process landscape data into our building stuff. But what I want to do here is actually want to use my neighborhoods, because this data will have the additional information . So we'll just go ahead and copy this. And for now, we'll just do a full-on replace and sort of see where we land. It should look pretty much the same, but it'll give us the ability to go in and modify the rotations of our neighborhood stuff fairly easily. Let's just circle back and turn this back on. So I'm just tapping the E key to enable and disable that. So we're still doing a pretty aggressive calling here. You know, I think that's okay. We'll figure that out in a second. All right, so I'm just going to pick one of these to align. And then I'll figure out what the other values need to be offline. So the colors tend to be a little bit brighter than what's actually being piped in. I'm going to guess 6 here. We'll just lighten it up, do a compile on that. Yeah, good guess. Okay, so I'm going to go over to rotations. Which one was that again? So that's index 6. That's really all we care about here. Index 6. Okay, so we can kind of see we need to rotate it a decent amount. Let's just try 30 degrees. 30 seems like a reasonable guess. It's a little hard to tell when they're not super close together. Cool. All right. So I'm just going to run through and figure out what these values need to be for the rest of the neighborhoods real quick. Here's where I ended up. Take a look at the values there. So again, this is just specifically related to my data. If your data looks different, your values here will also look different. That's one other thing I did in my PCG graph. Somehow I lost it. To make the points a little bit more dense and easy to track in terms of their orientation with the roads, I disabled the self-pruning on the small buildings. So we can go ahead and plug that back in. The next thing I want to do is set up the colors as a debug option. So let's head over to the blueprint. I'm going to add another variable. I'm going to call this one debug colors. Make sure you don't have any spaces in there. We're going to set the data type to a boolean, which is a true or false, and it's just going to be a single object here. Compile and save. Make sure it's visible. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy the name. We'll head over to our PCG City graph. And what I want to do is I want to add a little branch here before we hit our static mesh spawner. Going to add a get actor property node, which will allow us to access the Boolean value on our blueprint. I'm not sure why it's complaining about that. It is possible it doesn't like this little question mark here. So let's get rid of that. And then we got to get rid of it over here. Okay, no question marks, noted. All right, so basically if this is true, let's go back to our little debug. Where are we gonna be? Yeah, one of these will have validated on it, I think. Yeah, false, right? You can see it's false, and if I come over here and the actor and set it to true, then we would see that update. So if this is set to true, then we're gonna output this to B, otherwise we're outputting to A. So if it's false, what we wanna do, which is our A output here, you can see it's enabled versus grayed out, is we're just gonna do a set. And what we're gonna set is the color, point color. We'll create a make vector attribute here. It's got to be a float 4. Let's add a constant. I'm going to set this to 0.5. So this will be a nice middle gray. We'll set the alpha to 1, and we should be able to pipe that like that. So what it's going to do is basically override our incoming color data with this new middle gray value, which may ultimately be a little bit too bright. We'll see in a second. Otherwise, we will output B if this is set to true, which will give us our colors. So let's go ahead and save that. Click the blueprint, debug colors, set it to true. There's our colors, set to false. Once everything kind of processes, we go to white. Let's drop this down to like maybe a 0.1. Cool. All right. So there is all we need to do for our neighborhood orientation. Now let's go ahead and really dial in the city so that we can call this one good.